gardener. Sharon is my cohort back there, fellow master gardener. And we're going to be doing head counts and crowd control today to get you where you need to go, get back on the bus. It is critical that we stay on time because we have one more bus coming behind us, and we need to make sure that we stay on schedule. We're missing two?
They're coming. They were pointing. They were pointing over here.
Yep, any place there's a blank spot. I would like you to take a look to your right, your left, in front of you and behind you. When we get back on the bus, I'm going to ask you to look to make sure that everyone is here before we take off. We don't want to leave someone where they probably...
A totally integrated vegetable company is one of the largest in the United States, and it's based in Collier County. So it's been my pleasure to work here most of my adult life. I want to tell you a little bit, and I want to learn a little bit about you. How many of you have been on this ag tour before? How many of you liked it? Okay, I guess you did because you're back. How many of you are from Florida originally? Okay, that's two, bro. There you go. All right. So we got two Floridians. I am from Florida. How many of you are from the South? Nobody. How many of you are from the Midwest? Okay. How many of you are from Texas or the desert Southwest? Nobody. How many from the Pacific Northwest? How many from New England? You're from New England. How many from Canada? How many from someplace that I didn't mention? Where are you from?
England.
From England. Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, I come from what they call in the United States a conflicted family. My father was from a family that's from the South. They're from North Carolina, and they think one way. And my mother's from Michigan. She's Midwestern. She thinks a completely different way. So I grew up having rice for dinner and mashed potatoes at the same time. So anyway, we're gonna have about a 45-minute ride out. We're gonna talk about agriculture, and what I want to do is I'm going to talk to you about kind of what we're seeing as we're going by. I'm joined by this wonderful gentleman here. His name is Fritz Roca. Dr. Roca works for the University of Florida at the Southwest Florida Research and Education Center, which is going to be one of our stops early in the day. And he'll be able to tell you all about that. But he's a smart guy. He knows all about ag in Florida and the southeast United States. So he's a wonderful source of information. But what I want to do is I primarily want to talk about what you want to talk about. So if you have a question, I want you to raise your hand. Let's talk about what you're interested in, because what I'm going to do is, I got a problem, I talk a lot. I'm just going to keep talking until you tell me either to shut up or you change the subject or something. I'm going to do the best I can to make this a great full day for you. I want you to enjoy it. I want you to get as much information out of it as you want or need, and that's what we're going to do. So any questions to start out with?
What's the major crops that are grown in Collier County?
Okay, what we have in Collier County is we have a whole spectrum of things, sir. In Southwest Florida, agribusiness has a compound economic value of over $8 billion a year, okay? So what we have is we have citrus, we have winter vegetables that are primarily harvested between November and March. We have ornamental plants, we have cattle. People don't realize that cattle is a huge industry in the state of Florida. I think Florida is the #2 cattle state. But it's a different way than you might imagine from the Midwest, because what we do here, these cattle production here is cow-calf. In other words, we grow numbers of cattle, skinny ones, and then we ship them to the Midwest where people have grain and they fatten them up and get them ready for market. So Florida is a big agribusiness state, primarily in the interior of the state.
That's not something to brag about.
Large slave trade. Large slave trade.
So agriculture is very big because it's kind of hiding from most of the places you go in Florida. Most of the places people come and visit Florida is on the coast, or what we call the Beltway across between Tampa and Orlando. The rest of the interior of Florida is primarily undeveloped and is in agribusiness of some sort. you know, it's changed over time. The citrus industry once upon a time was much bigger than it currently is because the citrus business has suffered a lot of problems. It had a lot of very serious diseases and cold weather. You know, most of the crops here are very cold sensitive. They don't like temperatures below freezing, or they don't even like frost. So that's different than probably the agribusiness that you're familiar with where you're from, where cold weather is just an off season. Here, the busy season is really in the winter when farming cannot take place elsewhere in the United States, and Florida is very, very important during those winter months. Okay, so things, yes. Collier County is 78% in conservation, public ownership, and protected from development. So over 1,150,000 acres. There's some farming right here that you'll see, and you see that there's our plastic beds. Everybody does not farm here just on open furrow rows. They farm on what they call plastic mulch. The plastic mulch covers the soil right underneath the plant row. And we'll get a chance to talk about that a little more.
What would they have been growing then?
Excuse me, sir?
What would they be growing?
They are growing winter vegetables. They're growing peppers, tomatoes, squash, melons, all of those sorts of things, perishable crops.
Potatoes.
Stuff that we're all supposed to be eating in the grocery store. That's what they grow here in the winter. And of course, those crops are not winter tolerant. They don't like below freezing weather or frost. So down here in Florida, when you have, when it's cold enough, it dips down below 32 and you get a frosty morning, that can cause millions and millions of dollars in damage to the farming community and the crops. That's why sometimes in the winter, all of a sudden, the cost of fresh squash and beans and tomatoes and everything spikes up because it kills a lot of the crop. So bad things can happen. The farmers can lose a lot of money, and of course our cost of getting those vegetables goes up. Now, vegetables are also supplemented in the marketplace from other places, like Mexico, Central America, from greenhouse production up north and elsewhere, as far north as Canada. They grow tomatoes and of course cucumbers, things of that nature, indoors during the winter. But a lot of this area is conservation. You'll see a lot of wetlands. You'll see a lot of cypress trees, or the trees that grow in the wetlands. On our way out here, we're going to pass the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. How many of you have visited the Corkscrew Swamp? Oh, beautiful. Isn't that a beautiful place? It's the crown jewel of the Audubon Society. It is a preservation of wetlands. It's got some of the last remaining old growth or virgin cypress there. If you have not visited it, it's right up here, not too far down the road on this side of the road. So if you, in your travels in Collier County, please visit the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. There's a beautiful boardwalk there. You can spend an afternoon out there in the forest checking out all the rare birds and critters and stuff that live there. That ghost orchids, all sorts of interesting things. So Collier County has got an economy that's basically got three parts. The one that's the most popular is tourism. Everybody probably gets introduced to Collier County because they come down to Naples or they go to the beach, and that's one of our biggest industries. Our second biggest industry is agribusiness, which is what you're going to experience today. And the third one is growth, because a lot of people come down to visit Naples as a tourist, and then they decide they want to move here and they never leave. Here's a sanctuary. Sanctuary Road is right here on your left, and that, if you wind your way back through there, you go through a little beautiful little community, and you can go back there and take a great tour. So I'm going to look for this oil well here on the left. We go forward because the citrus industry has had a lot of really very severe problems right now. It's got a very, very serious problem called citrus greening disease. Citrus greening disease is a real bad disease that kills the tree, and it also impacts the fruit. It makes the fruit sour and reduces the amount of fruit that you get. So the University of Florida and ag institutions all across the United States are trying to come to grips with it. This disease is originally from Asia. It's been around for a very, very long time, about 100 years, but it's never been in the United States before. So right now, can everybody see all the flowers on those citrus trees? And when we get out of this bus, you're going to smell that beautiful, beautiful citrus aroma from those blossoms. This open land here is typically farmed in vegetables. The reason why citrus is farmed in one place and vegetables in another place is citrus really requires very well-drained soil. It wants to have land kind of similar to what the potato land is, light, fluffy, drained. Citrus doesn't like to be wet, so a lot of the selections on whether farmers choose where to farm is how the irrigation works in the ground. They want to farm in a place where they can irrigate their plants very well, because you know that your vegetables are 90% water.
So how do they irrigate with the round circular ones that you see?
There's several ways they're irrigated. There's bees. There's little bee colonies that are used to pollinate the melon crops. Fritz is pointing out to me. The vegetable crops are irrigated in several different ways. The most exacting and high-tech way is with micro-irrigation, drip tape, which is introduced under the plastic, and that drip tape, a little hose that runs down each individual row, weeps water out to the plant in a controlled way. The other way that it's irrigated is by raising the water up under the entire field. So what they do is they put a dike around the entire field, and they introduce water in different ways. Sometimes they run it down the field. Sometimes they pump it into ditches and raise it up under there, and they want that water to be at a very exact level. So all of these farmers that you see never want it to rain. They never want it to rain. The reason they don't want it to rain is because the rain makes the plants wet and it introduces disease into the crops. So they're providing everything the plants need. They're providing all the nutrients in this sand, because the sand really has very little nutrients. Why? Because this part of Florida gets about 50 inches of rain a year, and all the nutrients are gone. So they have to put all the nutrients under the plastic. They have to put the water under the plastic. They basically are growing a hydroponic crop. So the farmers here have to be very, very good with plant nutrition. Everybody loves to come here in the winter because the weather's nice, right? The bugs do too. The bugs think the weather is great, and they do very, very well. So what these farmers are doing is they are in a race, they're in an economic race to get the product off of their crops before the insects and disease get it. So what they're going to do is they're going to farm intensively for 120 days to have that crop to be able to deliver to you a beautiful tomato or a pepper or a zucchini squash, something of that nature.
So this is accommodation?
This is farm labor accommodation. Actually, this accommodation right here are workers that work at the Seminole Indian Casino. For those of you, how many of you have been to the Seminole Indian Casino? Okay. The Seminole tribe of Florida, those are one of our native Indian tribes. They are actually still in a state of war with the United States. If you ask them, they will tell you that they actually have never signed a peace treaty with the United States, and they are a sovereign nation. You know, how many of you live in states where there's Indians, Native American peoples? Okay. All those peoples are sovereign nations within the United States. They have their own, basically their own tribal government here. And we have a very, very good relationship with the Seminole Tribe of Florida. They do gaming industry. They're in the entertainment business in a big way. This little town here is Immokalee, Florida. It is a farm-based community. It's a community that's based on the farming that takes place here, citrus, vegetables, and ornamentals. And a lot of people here are seasonal residents, just like many of you are, and that they come here in order to provide the hands-on labor to grow these crops. Most of them are green card workers. Most of them have... They're not? Okay. No.
I guess, again, I've been sort of sitting on my butt here the whole time, so I haven't had a chance to sort of introduce myself, but I work with the University of Florida at the center we're going to see in a minute. And Most of my time, I've spent a little bit of time with vegetables, but most of my time has been spent on citrus management, and more recently on labor, on farm labor. It's a fact that 70% of our farm workers are here without legal documentation. A green card would be a legal document, work visa would be a legal document, but unfortunately, most of the workers that are here now are not. Let me back up. Everybody has documents. Okay, everybody has documents, but 70% are not legal. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And why does that make sense?
Because that's how it works in the
Well,
world.
yeah, that's how it works, but specifically, why? Yes, sir.
But isn't it a case, as long as they produce a document, even though it's illegal, you have to hire?
That's correct. Everybody has documents, so everybody comes in, and not just for agriculture, but any employment, there's what they call the I-9 form, where you have to present a document certifying who you are, which is typically a driver's license that has your picture on it, and you need to have another document that certifies that you are authorized to work. So a Social Security card would give you that ability. A passport would give you both. I mean, the U.S. passport, I should say, would give you both. A green card, again, would give you authorization to work, driver's license for identification. So when I first came here 20-some years ago, I was told that $30 could get you a driver's license and a Social Security card. And then you show up and you present those documents, and the employer is, if it looks reasonable, now if they see a driver's license, they see a picture that slipped off and they see another picture behind it, well, that's reasonable to say, wait a minute, this doesn't look legitimate. But most of the time, these documents look pretty good. And as an employer, not trained in identity, record verification, you have to accept it. So, because if you don't, you get in issues with stuff. So we are on the front lines of immigration and comprehensive immigration reform. So I don't want to say I'd be happy to, but by all means, that's an important issue to our country, and I'd be happy to talk. Well, I'm glad to talk about it and sort of give you what we think we know about it. But clearly, there's a lot of emotion attached to it.
So do the workers tend to go back to the same? Because I have friends who are farmers in England, and they have Polish workers, and they come back every year, the same people.
They travel across the country, ma'am, where the work exists.
So they don't tend to return to the same farm every year?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Well, let me say one thing about what Fritz talked about, and this is an issue, and let me tell you what's happened in this area. When I first started working in this industry, there were many, many more farms numerically than there are today. And I know if you're from the Midwest, you've experienced the same thing. There were many family farms. Today, there's not so many family farms. Those family farms have moved into they've been consolidated into large corporate farming situations. And I know you know what does everybody know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
You've seen this happen. Okay. The company that I worked for, and the reason I said what I said about the workers is I worked for Gargiulo. The Gargiulo company came under a lot of pressure because the general population that is unfamiliar with agriculture had the opinion that these large companies were in the illegal immigrant business, which they are not. So what my company decided to do after coming under all this pressure with these documents, for a while when I was a young manager, we said, okay, we're going to supervise these documents ourselves. We're going to bring everybody into our office and we're going to check these documents. We found out that we couldn't do that. At present, Gargiulo goes to a state agency called the Florida Job Service. When somebody comes and says, we want to go to work for the Gargiulo company, we say, please go over, take your documents to the Florida Job Service. If the state of Florida says you're okay, and they sign off on you, come back and we'll give you a job. And that's what the Gargiulo company has had to do because we can't come to we can never come to grips with it. So right now we're relying upon the state to help us out, and that's what most of these large corporations do. Now, if you're a real small farmer, you have a nursery or a little ag business, obviously you can't afford to have your own system to do this, so they do the best they can. But it is a big conundrum, and the problem is we need thousands of people. Sometimes to harvest the crops, we don't have enough people, in which case those crops are lost in the field. They go to not being harvested. Citrus has gone to a lot of more, they've tried to go with mechanical harvesting and things to reduce the amount of labor, but it's a big conundrum. typically people in the United States that grow up here do not wish to work as farm labor. It's an entry-level job. But I tell people, and I will tell you this today, in the time I worked with Gargiulo, who is a very, very socially responsible company, and when I say that, I'm telling you, I'm looking you right in the eye and tell you, we don't enslave people, we don't make them work in terrible conditions, we provide safe conditions, we don't tie people to trees. This is not taking place. The reason it's not taking place is very simple. Those people come here and they work for us of their own free will. We want to provide a great working environment. We want to treat them well. We want to help them. In a lot of cases, we provide very cheap housing for them. Let me finish 1 second. Because we want them to work for us, and we want to have great crops. So when they come and work, they make a boatload of money, and they want to come back to work for us. So we want to treat these people good. Yes, ma'am.
What is the pay scale?
Almost all of the pay scales in agribusiness here regarding harvest is called piecework, which means they get paid based on the amount they harvest. So the more they harvest, the more they get paid. They get paid on a unit level. Right now, a farmer, right now on a tomato harvest, a good worker can make $12 an hour. Okay, that's why they come here. They come here because, honestly, a lot of these people do not have any education. They do not have any skills, and many of them don't speak English. So $12 an hour compared to $5 or $6 a day, if they're from Mexico and they make $5 or $6 a day there, which you might not believe me, but that's what happens. $12 an hour is a life-changing amount of money for these people to start out their life. And a lot of them are young men, they're young, strong men, and they can work very hard, and they're willing to do that to get ahead. So this is an entry-level job for a lot of them. And most of them don't remain in that line of work very long. They learn how to speak English, they learn skills, if they stick around the farms, pretty soon they're learning how to operate a piece of equipment. Next thing you know, they're working for a construction company, they're working on a golf course, they're working in a nursery. It's the same thing your and mine relatives did when they came to the United States years ago, in the same position, okay? Not the tidiest people, no skills, but willing to work hard and get ahead. So agribusiness really is an entry-level job for people in the United States, and that dynamic, that immigration dynamic is, it's got some problems right now, but it's the same thing that's existed since the days.
So when they get this, they get subsidized housing, or they have to find their own housing?
They typically are provided housing by the farms that they work for. If you have 3,000 or 4,000 people, you have to help them do that. So typically those houses are either subsidized to them or provided for them.
And they get, like I just went to Colombia, and in the coffee plantations they give them lunch, because they give them their meals, they give them
some of the guest worker programs that come in, and I'll let Fritz talk about that, are a little different. We typically don't have guest worker programs. Talk about guest worker programs, Fritz.
Okay, another semi-controversial topic. There's a program called the H2A program. It brings in foreign agricultural workers. As an H1B program that brings in high-tech people for computers and things like that. But that's where I work. That's my home base. We'll be coming back there in a few minutes. But a guest worker is the only legal way that a agricultural grower can bring in people from a different country and work legally in agriculture now. They go through a visa process. There's a special H2A visa that they go through and get. There's recruitment going on. There's a whole contract that's drawn up, and they come and they work under that contract for, I thought it's up to 10 months, but I understand that those rules are changing, issues are changing, and but let's say 10 months right now, after which they need to return to the home country, and then they can be recruited to come back. So there's a whole contract that they work under. But those folks have been legally vetted by the consulate as well as our Department of Labor, and they come and they work. For those folks, the minimum wage currently is $10.70 an hour. That's the minimum wage. For a worker that's called domestic worker, the minimum wage in Florida is $8.05 an hour. So in terms of the question was about the wage rate, the wage scale, that needs to be our floor. Legally, that's the floor. So if people can earn more with the piece rate, more power to them. But if they somehow work less or pick less than the minimum wage, it has to be supplemented. So that all the hours, all the number of compensable hours, which is a legal term, they have to be paid at least $8.05. For guest workers, it's $10.70.
Let's introduce our first slide.
Okay.
Marty's going to introduce the Johnson Ranch here for you.
What's our first stop?
Our first stop that we're entering now is the Johnson Ranch, which is part of the beef and cattle industry. Jack Johnson was born into a local cattle family and was raised in the business. He and his wife Ann are the owners of the Johnson Ranch, as well as Jack and Ann's feed in Immokalee. The Johnsons own 45 acres, which is the site of the tour, and they hold land in about a dozen leases throughout the area in order to sustain their operation. So Jack will be meeting us and will be telling us all about his ranch.